Hello there, sword friends. Today I'm going to tell you about this sword right here. It is a St. Catherine from Mr. John Lundemo. If you're unfamiliar with his work, John Lundemo is the smith. Odin blades is I think the namesake that his forge uses. But anyway, he's a well-respected and pretty renowned craftsman in the sword making community, at least as modern made pieces go. And this is one of his earlier creations. Now I don't know exactly when, but I suspect it was somewhere in the early 2000s that this sword was made, and it's somewhat unique. He's made a few different iterations, as I understand it, of the St. Catherine, but this is one interpretation. And it's somewhat unique because it has a Damascus blade, which isn't something that is on all of the blades that he uses. But it's got some interesting features. It's one of my favorite swords, not just for the aesthetics, though those are interesting. I really love the way this particular one feels, and I'll include specs and weapon dynamics and all that kind of stuff in the description down below if you're so inclined to look at that kind of stuff. I'm not going to cut or anything in this video. It's just going to be a quick look. I had this out for cleaning, and I thought I would share it with you because it's a beautiful sword, one that I'm commonly asked to review, more commonly asked to sell, in fact, but I don't want to because it's really, really cool. Anyway, I'm going to tell you some bits, and I'm going to show you some bits, and here we go. Alright, so I'm going to start with the pommel, and the first thing I want to talk about is actually the patina on this particular pommel, because it is just a little rusted. Now, I don't know exactly if that was the way this blade came, though from the original photos it kind of looks like it does. This just has a really even patina on it, so it looks very close, just like rust, rather than like a bronzing or something like that, but I'm not exactly sure if that's the case. It looks a little too even to be naturally rusted, but anyway, that's kind of the aesthetic it has. It has these interesting facets and cutouts. It has a very, very cool looking pommel, not one that I've seen elsewhere. Nothing about it is sharp from a user perspective. It's easy to kind of hang on to, though I am somewhat meticulous about cleaning it off. Though I don't know if the original owner was. If he gripped the pommel, at least he did so evenly, because it doesn't appear to have any blotchy spots, or if there are, they kind of blend in, I suppose I would say. Anyway, it's pretty. Along here, you notice that it doesn't have really any kind of dimension this way, but here it's got all sorts of facets and a design that is mirrored on both sides. From my understanding, this was a kind of handmade piece, and I want to point out that nothing really looks off-center or imbalanced, at least nothing inherently to my eye. It may not be perfectly symmetrical, but nothing stands out as imperfect or poorly made or poorly done or off-kilter, which is worth pointing out if it's handmade. The other thing I think is worth pointing out here is the kind of peen block area, which isn't really a peen. I believe this is a hex nut, though I haven't ever had it apart. I don't know. That said, to have it kind of match the same type of patina and aesthetically look like it blends in like a peen block while being a hex nut is pretty cool. Not something I generally see embellished to match the rest of the sword. Anyway, I haven't had this apart. I can't say for certain it is, but it certainly looks like a hex nut construction to me, since I can kind of make out that this nut area is recessed somewhere in the blade. Now, where the grip transitions here is also pretty nice. Again, suspecting that this is a hex nut construction or a nut construction, I would venture a guess that the handle was assembled separately and then put on rather than assembled after the unit was, or finished off, I suppose I should say. So there's no surprise that there's no kind of yucky bits attached on either side of the cross or on where the grip meets the pommel. Anyway, the grip itself is pretty aesthetic. Rugged is the word I'm looking for. I'm tripping over my words here. It doesn't have the same type of refinement that I see on many swords that have kind of the cord wrapped, then leather bound type look. It has a little bit more rough and tumble look, but I think that adds to the aesthetic, the kind of worn looking pommel and the rough looking aesthetic, but it's still crisp. I mean, you notice the risers here are very clearly defined. There's no leather rim. There's obviously one that you can spot if you're looking hard enough, but nothing juts out on my fingers or anything like that. It also is elliptical, easy to index, and has some dimension. I suppose it would be nice if there were some more swells or a little bit more dimension, but overall I find this to be a very, very comfortable sword to hold, whether it be in one hand or in two. If I look at the grip, I don't know how you would exactly define it. It's certainly comfortable for my big old sausage hands here, and obviously I have plenty of space to fit two on. If I'm choking up on the guard, or if I don't mind grabbing the pommel or resting my fingers on the pommel, it's very comfortable to fit two hands on. Nothing also bites me. Again, from a user perspective, this is really easy when there's these very clean lines on here. Crisp lines often can lead to sharp ledges, which are easily bite into my appendages and things like that if I'm not using a glove. That isn't the case. Also, if I go onto the crossguard here, again, same story. There's no kind of mucky, yucky, anything like that. And you can kind of see here where me, or the previous owner, me if I haven't been diligent about cleaning it, which I like to think I have, there's a little blotch of rust here showing on the fittings, suggesting these are some sort of carbon steel, a rustable substance, but it's kind of where your fingers would rest, and that's where it's rusted, the oils from your hands. Anyway, along the cross here, you can see that there are chamfered edges along the quillions here, making it pretty comfortable. They have, you know, little flattened sections here with little indentations for decoration. Overall, aesthetically, it's very pretty. I also want to point out that there's no ripply spots in the fitting, so I don't know if my camera is going to pick this up here, but if I turn this around ever so gently, there's no spots of ripple. And I tried making a crossguard once. It did not go particularly well, but I did note that grinding on these flats so that they are clean and crisp is a tough thing to do if one is doing it by hand. So respect to Mr. Lundemo's steady hand. One other bit I talk about is the gap in the crossguard. Now this particular one has a larger than I would like to see gap in the crossguard, but I understand it takes a lot of time and doesn't really matter, so not necessarily something worth investing a ton of time on. But you can see there is a gap here. One side is marginally cleaner than the other. I would say only marginally so. Still, it's overall very reasonable in terms of size, but you can make out a couple millimeters around where the blade meets the cross. The gap in the crossguard is worth noting that it doesn't really impact performance, and historically I think it's worth saying that there's variety in the types of historic arms that are out there, so it's not ahistoric or anything like that. Anyway, it's just a point worth pointing out. I'm going to move on to the scabbard now, and first thing to point out is it doesn't rattle around. It's very secure, at least in terms of rattling. It does come out. If I turn it upside down, it'll slide out of the scabbard, and I don't know what retention it had when it originally came from Mr. Lundemo. Again, I got this second hand, and it's relatively old, so wood changes ever so slightly, and if it's friction fit, that's not necessarily going to hold up forever. Either way, functionally, scabbard is fine. I don't know, these belt loops here look like they would fit onto just about any belt. I didn't get a belt with it, but it looks like this would be reasonable to figure out if I was so inclined to wear the scabbard, which I'm not. Other bits on the scabbard, it has these raised sections, these 5 raised crosses here, and other adornments. It also has a metal chape, and this metal chape has some additional embellishment in it. It also has a ledge here, but it's not so pronounced that I feel like it would catch or snag on anything if I were walking by something and being clumsy. Along the spine, it's not sewn. It looks like it's glued on, but the seam is very clean and very well done, and hasn't risen up or become loose over the many years that this sword has been around. Now, while I've had it, I haven't used it. I've taken it out, I've swung it around a little bit, but I haven't cut anything with it. The previous owner, though, did cut with it. He noted as much and said that it cut really, really quite effectively. It has a very nice edge on it, but I haven't done anything with it. I'm too paranoid. It's a relatively expensive piece, and I could sell it, and so I'm always kind of on the fence about trying it out, swinging it at something, enjoying it from a from a practical standpoint, or but at the risk of potentially devaluing the sword should I choose to sell it, which I really don't want to do, as I noted, because it's very cool. Anyway, I'm going to tell you about the blade, pointy stabby part. All right, first thing worth pointing out, it has a very nice ring to it. The blade weighs just over 3 pounds, and I'll put, again, weapon dynamics, computer information, as well as specs and all of that kind of stuff. The blade is pretty interesting. It's relatively rigid. It doesn't have a ton of flex to it. It has some, but overall it's relatively stiff. It has a very keen edge, and geometry-wise, it has a hexagonal kind of cross-section here, which gradually thins out and becomes almost a central ridge about 2 inches from the tip. The lines are very subtle here, though. They're not super pronounced in terms of the ridges on the sword. It is a very pronounced and heavy etch, which shows off this Damascus pattern. From my understanding, Mr. Lundemo did not make the steel. I don't know exactly what the combination of this particular steel is, but it has, with however he's done it, it's a very pretty sword. It also has the 5 crosses matching on either side of the blade, as it does on the scabbard. The scabbard only has 5 crosses on one side, but the blade has this kind of etched in or engraved in crosses on both sides of the blade. Feeling-wise, the blade is absolutely amazing, and hopefully you can see how pretty the blade is. I'll show you in greater detail the pattern on it and whatnot, but I just want to point out that it feels absolutely amazing in the hand. As pretty as this blade is, it feels even better. And I hadn't had many blades from John Lundemo, and I haven't had a chance to really handle many. And initially I was Well, basically, he's got quite a following online. A lot of people praise his work, and in looking at a sword, you can't necessarily tell why. You can appreciate the aesthetics of a sword, like it or not, and that can be very subjective, but it takes almost feeling a sword in the hand to really appreciate how it feels dynamically, beyond what the dynamics computer and that kind of stuff can really share. And this feels really like magic in the hand. It is one of the finest feeling swords, at least from a European style, that I've been able to hold. I really like it, and it's this kind of, it's the way it feels that makes me want to keep it. Not just that it's a pretty thing made by a maker of some renown, it's that it is just so magnificent feeling in the hand. Anyway, that's my personal thoughts on the dynamics of the sword. I'm not going to swing it around, not that that would really provide you with much insight. Cutting might be a little fun to see, and maybe someday I will, but at the moment, not. Anyway, I will show you in greater detail the Damascus pattern on here. And one thing, actually, before I do, you can kind of make out, because I can see it in the camera right now, that it almost looks like the surface is wrinkled. And if I am able to get this blade in the light correctly, we'll see if it cooperates. The surface is not actually very ripply. If I run my hand along the surface, and don't worry, I brought it out for cleaning, I will oil it when it's done, I don't feel surface ripples. It looks extremely ripply, but it is not, and you can kind of make it looks like it's wrinkled or something, and that is certainly not the case. It is very, very smooth. The lines on it are very clean. The ridges are subtle, I would say, but the surfaces are actually quite well made, and it's a very interesting thing. It's like an optical illusion. It reminds me of one of those kind of holograms. You hold it up in the light, and it kind of, the ripply kind of-ness moves around on it. Anyway, suffice to say, the lines, the surfaces are really quite flat and well made. Hopefully it shows you. You can kind of see the reflections, the ripples. This has a satin polish, but again, the kind of ripply nature of this steel really brings out some interesting character in a polish that I haven't seen before in a type of finish. The Damascus pattern on here is really quite good. It has some reflectivity. It's not a mirror polish, obviously, and the heavy etch has almost a texture to it, but it's not particularly weak either. So you can see in this section it's been cut with, it's been rusted a little bit, and down here you can make out some of the surface scratches that have resulted from cutting. And it's worth pointing out that the polish hasn't diminished substantially underneath these cuts, so usage wise it's not as though it's destroyed in one whack. And you can kind of make out here, it almost looks like a central ridge, but it's still hexagonal at this point, and it's not until about yay on the blade, right towards the tip, that it turns into a central ridge and remains reinforced all the way out to the tip. It does have some distal taper. It seems very gradual. Anyway, I had this up for cleaning. I thought it was worth sharing. I'm still very tempted to cut with it at some point just because it begs to be used. It has excellent edge geometry. It has a very keen edge, at least it feels that way, and I really want to go out and whack stuff with it. But, well, bad things can happen if I do that, and I don't want to degrade the quality of the sword. And right now, I do enjoy taking it out just as an artistic piece to enjoy. It's seen some better days. Obviously, it has some rust and imperfections that have shown up on the pommel as well as on the cross. There's a few blemishes on the blade, but overall, it's still an amazing piece to look at. And really, it becomes even more amazing once you hold it in your hand. It's a very compelling and fun sword. Immediately one that you kind of feel connected to, one that feels like it has a great amount of tip control, but also like you could get the edge in wherever you want to with precision, and still enough meat on it to have some authority. At 3 pounds, it's a reasonably stout sword. At 3 pounds, they certainly make swords that are less weight than that, but for what it is, it feels really impeccably balanced. Really a wonderful sword to move around. One hand, two hands, either way, it's a joy. Anyway, I had this out to clean it. Obviously, it can rust, and I don't want it to rust any more than it already has. So I'm going to finish my cleaning regimen here, and then I'm going to put it away. But I thought you would enjoy seeing it. It's a very pretty sword. One of the highlights of my collection, one I really enjoy owning, and I hope the video was interesting. Anyway, that's all I've got for you. As always, cheers, and thanks for watching.